You are now listening to the Here for the Truth podcast, hosted by Joel Rafidi and Yerasimos.
All right, truth seekers, welcome back to the Here for the Truth podcast. As you know, say it every time, but I'm Joel Rafidi. I got my co-host Yerasimos here. Oh man, we've had an incredible run of episodes, and today's absolutely no different. We have the amazing Matt Presti in the house, a name you might not be familiar with. Some of you might be. He's the former president of the Walter Russell University. And today we're diving deep into the secrets of light and consciousness. So come on this exploration with us. We talk about really the true meaning of light, what it means to live a life of balance, the true nature of God, and much, much more. This is a really fascinating conversation. Right before I bring Matt on, just want to remind our listeners that round 4 of Rise Above the Herd applications are now open, spots are filling up, and this round starts on November 29th. We're taking 12 students only. So if you're interested in learning more, in connecting with your own inner authenticity, with walking the path of your highest potential, and really cultivating a life that's reflective of your true values, one that's not dependent on anyone or anything for security, stability, and also for happiness. So we'd love to meet you. So you can submit an application at riseabovetheherd.co and you'll get a complimentary 20-minute call with us to discuss whether it's the right fit for you. All our episodes are at hereforthetruth.com. Again, guys, we really, really appreciate your support. This platform continues to grow because of your listenership. So thank you so much, and please enjoy this episode. All right, everybody, welcome to episode 96 of the Here for the Truth podcast. Today, we have an amazing guest with us. We have Matt Presti. I'm going to do my best with this bio because he's got a long list of credentials over here. He's a meta-scientist, musician, patriot, philosopher, poet, practitioner of universal law, natural science and living philosophy, audio and video producer, broadcaster. He hosted the series Interviews and the Exploration of Consciousness. He's the former director of operations and president of the University of Science and Philosophy, formerly the Walter Russell Foundation, and he is currently the CEO of Universal Power LLC. He also is a volunteer firefighter on Montauk Rural Fire Department in Dent County, Missouri. Matt, welcome to Here for the Truth, bro.
Thanks, guys. It's a pleasure to join you.
It's a pleasure to have you here, man. There's a lot to talk about, but, with new guests here, we really like to get into your major rites of passage, your personal hero's journey around, your venture into truth seeking and discovering what that is. So could you give us a brief rundown of how you found yourself, I guess, in this world?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It started when I was a kid. I always had this exploratory nature, this massive imagination. I was inspired a lot by classical music my dad turned me on to as a kid with the LP 33s. We had this old crappy stereo that had one speaker. It was a mono, I called it the Red Beast. But I would play these records and just lose myself in imagination, the music, and often found myself wandering alone outside. We had in our suburb, this little section of woodland, and you'd always find me out climbing trees or hiding under the honeysuckle bushes, just daydreaming. So I had a great active imagination and still try to keep that alive today. Of course, the older you get, the more responsibilities you get. So that kind of wanes, but it waxes and wanes. So you just got to catch those inspirative moments and develop them and go with them when they happen because they're rare. But, just as a kid, it was a magical childhood. I grew up with both parents, fortunately. So I had a mom and dad in the home the whole time I was there. And I think that benefits a lot. You see a lot of kids today don't have that, unfortunately. But anyways, the balance there was definitely a plus. And just having that imaginative childhood, and movies, especially the older I got, the Star Wars, of course, and Raiders of the Lost Ark, things like that. When you're just a tween, those things have huge impacts on you, especially in the imagination part of you. And so I just carried that in. I got into music around 7 or 8 years old, obviously with the classical, but my dad bought me this little Jadwin piano. It was like one octave of little notes on little chime piano, basically. And so I learned to play one finger songs with that. And eventually it developed into a full blown love for music. And I played in several bands over my lifetime and ultimately got uh, dissuaged of playing with people because there would always be somebody who quit. Usually the drummer, not to pick on drummers, but being a bass player and keyboard player and vocalist, I just decided it was time to do my own thing, write my own music. And so I learned all the instruments, drums, bass, keys, guitar, and vocals. And I wrote close to 400 songs in my life and recorded about 150 of those, and about 85 plus are up on YouTube for free to listen to. So that was a big love for me. And other than that, I just, I got really into around 2001, I think, was a big wake up call and for a lot of people. But I had started in 98 with the exploration of UFOs and Richard Hoagland's Enterprise mission and ETs and Stephen Greer and that whole thing. And eventually with 9/11, that's when I really started to go full blown into it. It took me a couple months to get my head out of my butt with the 19 guys in a cave official story. But once I found out about Building 7, there were a 3-day period I didn't sleep. I just was absorbing everything I could. And that completely altered my worldview, and I stepped foot into the conspiracy realm and have been there since. And like so many great researchers before us, we all need new conspiracy theories because all our old ones came true, so there's never been such vindication for conspiracy realism, I would prefer to call it. But so that led into spirituality, and eventually spirituality. I discovered Walter Russell after reading a lot of Eastern, comparative religious study, Eastern and Western mysticism. And then Russell came to my life in 2008 with The Secret of Light. And that just blew my mind being a musician. And I met a lot of musicians who have verified this, but they just were blown away by Russell's work. It spoke to them not only as wisdom and logic, but also to the soul in rhythm. There's a kind of cadence to his writing that a musician picks up on. So that blew me wide open, man. I couldn't get enough. I bought every single thing I could find by Russell and his wife Lau, and I just absorbed it all. And I went to Swannanoa, which was the home for the university that they started of science and philosophy for 50 years from 1948 to 1998. And I went there for the first time in 2010, met a bunch of former students, former staff, former president, current presidents. And I was just blown away. It was radical. It was really cool to meet people that were, actually knew them and some of the work they did, and so I got more interested and I started doing little podcast things here and there. And then I did a series called the Secret of Light series, which got noticed. That my Knowing the Creator 101 series got noticed by then President Michael Hudak, who handpicked me to succeed him as the president of the university in 2015. So that was a real honor. And then I also knew that the artwork wasn't out on display, and I felt that that really needed to get back out to the world. So that was a big part of my administration, and we did accomplish that. We were able to get that 40 plus tons of art and sculpture back out on the world to be displayed. And it's a greatly inspirational collection of art, all done by one human being, which is only 2% of the work he ever did. The rest is out there in the world somewhere, but just hugely inspirational. And I've since graduated on from the university into the private sector. But I'm really honored to be able to join you guys. Hope that wasn't too long-winded.
No, it wasn't long-winded at all. And it was actually, it was a great introduction, man. A really cool journey that you've been on. I remember in a previous interview that you told your mom that you'd be the president of a university one day, and you became one. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, she said, "How are you going to be president of something of a university, especially if you've never gone to college?" And my famous words, like I like to tell people, especially at the university, is, quote, "Watch me," unquote.
Yeah,
So that's kind of my mantra. Somebody says you can't do something, my reply is, "Watch me."
It's like
My favorite Ayn
there you
Rand
go.
quote. It's not who's going to let me, it's who's going to stop me.
There you go.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yep.
Also, man.
Can you
Yeah.
just give us kind of a general background and information on Walter Russell, and who he was and what he stood for, and a little bit about his body of work?
Well, Russell was definitely in the genius category of humans. He's up there with Goethe and, so many great philosophers you could name as well. He is what I would consider to be a Western mystic. There's no doubt in my mind, because his experience of things behind the scenes, the reality behind the scenes, behind the divided universe, is again, it's unparalleled in my opinion. And I've studied a lot of the Eastern and Western religious modalities and the mystics of both East and West, but nobody ever has written about their experience in the light, as he called it, which is really consciousness. It's the undivided white magnetic light of mind. And he saw two universes. His still universe of white magnetic light is the undivided. So that's if your hemispheres short circuit in your brain, and all you see, not using your senses, is the white light of mind, which is the basically it's the medium, or it's the what's the best word I could use, the field that unfolds duality and which duality refolds into. And it can be symbolized by a seed. A seed grows up toward the sky as the tree, but also down as the roots. So there's your duality, but it's always centered. Duality is always centered by a fulcrum, and that would be the seed. Just like we're seeds in the womb of our mothers, we are given life by the union of mother and father opposites. When those two things come together, that's what seeds the further what's called an offspring, to spring off of a union. So I mean, it's as divine as it gets. He started his journey very young. He wrote at 8 months old. He heard the hurdy-gurdy man coming down the street, and he was playing this tune on the hurdy-gurdy. So he ran to the piano and started playing that exact song with one finger at 8 years old. I'm sorry, 8 months old. And then he would later go on to become the church organist at 11, 12, somewhere in that range. And he got into painting and drawing, and eventually he mastered all the five fine arts.
Wow.
He was conferred 11 degrees, one doctorate of science, yet with only a fourth grade education. So aside from mastering the five fine arts, he was well known. He was sought after for his talent by both the Illuminati of that day, which are the Roosevelt administrations, both administrations. He was the personal portraiture artist for Teddy Roosevelt, and then he was official sculptor for the FDR administration. And so he ran with the famous people in those circles, but he always stressed the importance of being alone in order to garner that inspiration to be able to do the feats that he did, both artistically and as an author. He excelled. So he wrote several children's books around the turn of the 20th century. And he also wrote his magnum opus, a lot of people consider to be the Universal One, which came out of a direct experience of that light that we mentioned earlier. And that became a foundational book that I believe challenged the Catholic Church's hegemony on science and the quantum physics that was coming into being back in the early 30s. And I even think it went to the point where he recalls a story on tape, on audio, that I heard that you can find at the University of Science and Philosophy's YouTube page. And it was a explanation of his remembrance of the Pope threatening to issue a decree against him if he reprinted the Universal One. It's around 1931. He was threatened by the Catholic Church. And if you got a decree against you back in the 30s by the Catholic Church, you wouldn't be able to work anywhere in the world. So it's reminding me of a Michelangelo moment. If you've ever seen the agony and the ecstasy when Charlton Heston's painting and he's in an argument with the Pope, and the Pope says, "How is it an artist is closer to God than I am, and I'm the Pope?" So he went through some hard times. So he after the release of the Universal One, it challenged science. It put science, turned it on its head. He was ridiculed. He wrote that they threw his work in the wastebasket and ridiculed it and persecuted him for having put the creator into the creation as opposed to removing the creator from its creation. See, creation to him and creator is a must-be, a must-do relationship. Because how can you have a painting without a painter? How can you have a poem without a poet? And how can you have creation without a creator? So the basic genesis and maturation of Russell's work was that we live in a mind wave universe, and that mind is causal and matter is an effect. And so that was the basic underlying theme of his philosophy. He would later divorce his wife of 56 years, citing that he felt as a man who had been released from prison, they didn't get along very well. But he would meet Leo some months before that. And once they decided to get married in 1948, I believe it was, they were looking for a place to buy, to purchase, to be able to display all his artwork, which is a massive collection. And so they picked Swannanoa, found that back in 48 and set up and got things open as of 1949. And the rest is history, as they say. They were able to write many books together. Their famed home study course is just I cherish it. It's just one of a kind of courses, if you will. And it really, the unique thing about their material is it puts the impetus on self-unfoldment on you. It removes all middlemen. Anything in the middle is removed. It's you and the creator, which is in you, not outside of you. It sort of is both, but it's really developing that relationship with the self, which is God, to the degree that you're aware that it is. And those human beings, as the Russells both have cited, who have done the greatest things in this world are very aware of that relationship, of that inner power. And you can call it what you want. You can call it power, truth, love, light, balance, rhythm. It has a myriad of names, which are all synonymous, but that light within is really the power source that we're supposed to, they encourage us to connect with that and become geniuses of our own.
Yeah. I can see how the Pope would put a decree out against him for those beliefs. Matt, if I were to if Walter Russell was in front of me right now, or even you, I'll ask you, like, what is God? In that regards, like, what would he say? What do you say about that?
Well, he does answer that. They actually define it in Atomic Suicide. It's the chapter, page 107 begins, "We define God." I don't think any chapter in any book anywhere was ever written like that, but it's astounding. The book Atomic Suicide is astounding. I like to say it melted my brain. But it's a read that really explains, it's the maturation of the Russell science. His concepts matured over 40 plus years as he developed them and became more aware of them. But basically, the universe runs on balance, and God is really mind. It's mind itself. But what mind does is mind thinks. And then that's sort of the mind would be the spiritual, the capstone of the pyramid. And your two lower corners would be physicality, the bodies of things, and then the brains, or the thinking, or the mental aspects. So physical, mental, spiritual. So the mind really is the spiritual. The mental is the thinking process, which is what our brains do. And the body is what builds other bodies. So everything man made in existence was first a spiritual idea, which was then mentally thought out. And then using the two strong arms of the body, we actually physically build these things that we call bodies, and that's the process of creation. And so I think that he would define God as uh, the dimensionless, still, silent, undivided, eternal light of mind, if you will. And so really, I want to step further to say that that would be consciousness, because consciousness never sleeps. Consciousness, you lose sense of your body sensation, but your mind is still aware. It's just you don't have the sensation of the body during sleep. And many people I've spoken with over the years, I've heard a lot of stories about their coming close to illumination, how consciousness can exist outside of the body, outside of the realm of time and space. It seems to be all there is. And there's sort of this idealism in philosophy which puts mind as the cause of the universe, where the materialists say some primordial atom called a God particle, created the universe. It's a very materialistic, everything can be reduced down to a machine kind of explanation. But the idealists really tend to put uh, mind as a cause for this universal construct, because it truly is, if you really think about it. You can look at, again, there's a billion examples, which I offer up as Exhibit A, which is anything man-made is first. That's your proof right there. It was all an idea in the mind of a human whose only task was to think out that idea and then build the body for it. And then behold, it stands before us. This podcast is an example of an idea that is being built and thought out and constructed in the physical universe, which will then be able to be heard by many people around the world. So,
Yeah. I really I love that you just said that, because something I've talked about before, when people bring up this idea, like, what is, do we have a purpose as individuals? And I always say this, like, if you look around you, every single thing, like, I'm looking around, I'm home in the place I grew up, in my childhood bedroom. And so I'm seeing around all these different things on my desk, and every single one of them has some purpose. So this idea that each individual doesn't have a purpose in this life, and I know you've talked about the unfoldment, how to connect and tap into that inner light and your inner purpose as an individual. Like, to think that a person doesn't have a purpose would seem silly to me, when every single thing outside around us has a purpose. So I don't know if you want to comment on that at all, or Joel.
yeah, I'd just say real quick, if people didn't have a purpose, they tend to join collectives that give them one, and that's the danger. The United States being an experiment, whatever you think about it, it championed the individual.
Yeah.
And that created the fertile soil for geniuses to emerge, because individualism was championed over the crowd, you could call it. So anywhere where that happened, which really the United States, one of the sole places in the world, there's a few other, the Western civilized countries that over the past 200 years have produced some of the greatest minds in the world. And purpose is an interesting thing, because everything that you're looking at seems to have a purpose, but why is man the anomaly that doesn't? So I would say that's due to education in large part, because we're not taught in schools, minus a Steiner model or, the Montessori kind of model that champions the development of individual talents and things of that nature, the love of the child. What are those loves? Help them develop them, and you're going to see a purposeful person develop with that. And I just don't think we have that in the majority of our school systems these days. So I would hope to see that unfold more. And that's part of the reason I do what I do, is to get word out to people that, hey, you can teach your child other ways than just, the ways of the public school system. And a majority of the students at the university, ironically, are from the university system. They have told me many times over, we were hoping to learn what you guys teach at our university, UCLA or NYU, but found out they didn't offer this stuff there. It was just, this is your conformist view of reality, take it or leave it. But, you really need that healthy spiritual um, inculcation to really develop. I think that's what's missing in the schools, and why people tend to be without purpose and then join these, you know, crowd causes, if you will.
Well, of course, man. I love the theory, or the idea that you're bringing out, which is the basis of Russell's work, because what you're saying ultimately, from what my understanding is, that everything begins from imagination, right? Everything begins with an idea. And then through us as the vessel, we can make those ideas in this, I guess, formless consciousness tangible through physicality. And to me, isn't it the most empowering thing ever? The fact that you have this gift as a human being to access this imagination, to access this realm of ideas, and to create.
They did a boil down of the great religions of the world, and basically each religion, its greatest tenet says something along these lines. Man's sole purpose is to be like his creator. And you can read that, basically surmise that from all the great religions of the world. You know, our sole purpose for being is to manifest our creator,
Yeah.
which is creation. It's to be co-creators. So again, I mean, there's all the opportunity in the world for mankind to recognize this, but the problem is our current system doesn't really promote that kind of thing. So you have to dig elsewhere to find it. I think it's getting more popular, though. I really do. And I'll say we were all sidetracked or sideswiped by, the whole COVID thing.
Yeah.
But in a sense, that can only stifle people for so long. And for many, I'll say this much, that 2020 was the best sales year for Russell books in the history of the university. We did like $330,000 in sales. As people, I guess you could say, because of the lockdowns, because of those things, they begin to question their reality. So it seems to me that evil tends to always shoot itself in its own foot. You know, it is the sower of the seeds of its own destruction. And so in a sense, that's a benefit for people to wake up, to have to go through some pain, and some questioning their existence, to be able to again rediscover that imagination. But it also had a lot of harmful effects. But I'm confident that humanity will come back, because its purpose, if you look at the reason we're created, it's to manifest our creator. And as much as this group of the powers that never were, as I like to call them, they just assume control, but it doesn't mean they actually have it. They're going to find out the hard way that any violation of universal law, to the degree that they violate it, it's to the degree they're going to be broken by it. And whether it takes 10 years, 100, or the next few months, we're going to see some incredible changes in that front.
I hear you there, man. Listen, 2020, it was one of the best years of my life, the last couple of years. I mean, this podcast was created out of all of that, our connection, me meeting Joel, and I think for so many people, um, it's similar. They had more time to be with themselves, to observe what's going on around them, to be like, something's fucking wrong. This is weird. And to have this time and to go on the websites and internets and documentaries and podcasts and be like, oh, who's this Walter Russell person? I mean, even for me, I mean, I've heard about him for a while, but never got into it. But I've seen over the last few years so many more people quoting him on like their Instagram stories or their Facebook feeds. And it's just a testament to having that extra time to think and contemplate and introspect, and then to source out some of these great thinkers. Because the reality is, man, everything that I've learned in my life that I think has served me into becoming the person that I am today was learned. Yes, okay, there were some childhood things, and being raised a certain way, of course, have impacted me. But after I left university, after I left the academic institutions, is when I went down on my own hero's journey, my own path, and started being more curious about some of these great thinkers, or picking up a book here and seeing where it led me. And so, our academic system is flawed, but again, it comes down to the individual, and what do you want to do with that? It's like that the great was the great quote by Walter Russell, and it's mediocrity is self-inflicted and genius is self-bestowed. So, to what degree are you going to take ownership of your life and go out there and learn the things that you need to learn so you can be the person you want to be and manifest the creator, manifest those creations. So I dig it.
Yeah, I don't mean to knock academia, but I do. Um, the the current administration is full of nothing but Ivy League graduates. And look how they're running things. If that isn't proof enough that academia isn't the end all be all, just because you involve or are involved or a part of the Ivy League doesn't mean you know how to do things.
Yeah.
So I would say a group of hillbillies could run the United States better than what we're seeing run it right now. And of course, there's an agenda behind it too. Of course, Klaus Cotton Schwab and his WEF. This is their vision of a new world, the fourth turning. Which is also a turning for us as well. It's a turning for creative people to say, I'm no longer going to go down this path of destruction.
Yep.
And reset. We're gonna eject you guys and create our own civilization that doesn't need you. Sort of the Ayn Rand model. Atlas Shrugged. We don't need you. We're going to go our own way and do our own thing.
We'll take our talents elsewhere.
Exactly. And we don't need you to do what we are already capable of doing, which you've utterly failed in your responsibility. That's the problem with selfishness, is it only looks out for itself and it thinks it has the greatest talent pool, but we're killing them with memes, man. I mean, have you ever seen a meme war go so bad for one side, but so good for another? We're killing them with memes. My God, we don't even have to fire bullets. But yeah, it's a matter of, people are going to have to turn on their creative abilities and really start working to create the new model to replace the old one. And I don't think, as Buckminster Fuller said, we don't need to do it violently. If we just build the new one and gravitate toward that, the old one will become obsolete by default. So I'm really hopeful that we can get out of this without having to go toward a revolution style escape route. But, whatever needs to be done.
Me too, man. And I think it's happening. And that was the power of 2020. It was so polarizing that people were forced to either choose an authentic path and face their demons and slay their dragons, or be taken into the abyss of inauthenticity. And each time an individual turns on that light, connects with a higher purpose, removes dependence from these systems, develops self-reliance. To me, that is the Ayn Rand model. That is me saying, I'm taking my talents elsewhere. I don't need you. You've shown me what you're about. That's it, and someone leaves the herd. And then, those empowered individuals get the chance to cooperate voluntarily, like this conversation right now, to call others forth. So to me, it absolutely is happening. There's no doubt about that. My question to you is, how does one cultivate and reconnect with that inner light?
Well, the inner dialogue needs to be established. And I like to call that vertical awareness, cultivating vertical awareness. We have this seesaw, the electricity between the hemispheres. We're always polarized. We got logic, we got imagination, we've got reason, we've got intuition. Left brain, right brain. It's like constantly doing a dance. But if your left brain gets too much involved in itself, too egotistical, which really ego is just an acronym. Ego would be externally generated outlook. It's what your senses perceive and how you relate to other people. You have to put something out there, right? Something external. You have to talk, you have to look at and shake hands and tell people about yourself. So that's our external way of thinking about ourselves, our directed outward expressive ability to communicate. But at the same time, how many people inculcate a inward relationship? And again, I think I would say education doesn't have any idea about this, or they would teach it. That's why these great masters whose shoulders we stand on have given us a blueprint, a roadmap to, I really love the inwards: intuition, intelligence, imagination is another one. The I Magi Nation, right? The single eye, let your eye be single. I think that's just another way of saying, notice the light within you. Stop that dance of the hemispheres, turn that horizontal, outward, sense-based view of reality vertical, and start seeing the world from a stable position. And again, they say my experience, a lot of musicians really understand Russell. What is it I was asking myself just a couple weeks ago, what the hell is it that makes musicians get Russell in a way that most laymen don't? Why is the musician sort of have an advantage to understanding his work and stuff? And it came to me that musicians, by default, many of them, most of them, I would say, think with both sides of their brain at the same time. And that's exactly what vertical awareness is. It's the ability, to the degree, now there's degrees of that, but to the ability you're able to think with both sides of the brain at the same time is to the degree that you can, really turn on those creative abilities and also realize certain things that others don't realize. It's sort of a way of getting behind motion and then commanding motion to be your servant as opposed to being the servant of motion, the servant of material. You can command matter or you can be matter's servant. And the materialists are all servants to matter. They serve matter. They're generally hedonists.
Yeah.
They live for the the bang and the thrill and the body and the lights and the flashing. A lot of materialists hang out at the casinos. A lot of materialists, they're just glued to the external world. So there's really where in contrast you find the poet, the painter, the sculptor, the philosopher in his study alone with his hand on his knee thinking, like the great thinker motif. And that's what it takes to discover the inner world. It takes a lot of inward thinking. And Dr. Russell's really one to call that out in his IBM lectures, the Think lectures. And there's a book available by that title, Think, the Ethics of Business, I think. And he really talked about that balance that men have to, basically humans have to develop a balance between their external thinking, wants and desires, and then an internal. He basically said a daydreamer is one who gets nothing done because he's always in his own head. But then you have the opposite of that, which is the materialist who's always go, 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 live for the senses, and it's all external. Everything, all his focus is directed externally, outward from his soul.
Yeah.
So the balance is to think outwardly and inwardly. So the outward is the expression of the soul to the world. The inward thinking is the consideration of the soul, its desires and ideas. And you have to have a balance of that. So it's all about balance. The number one tenet of Russell's work was balance.
Absolutely, man. Very reminiscent of, I guess, the lemniscate, the infinity symbol, right? That flux between coming back to center point to the inwards, then external output, and returning again. And you're so right. Again, we're polarized. Some people can just be, consumed with input without having any execution. And I guess in the materialists are just purely focused on execution without really coming back to the internal. So in your experience, I guess I want to ask you, like, how does that play out? Do you have a practice to cultivate balance? What does that look like in your own life?
Well, if you're out of balance, the good thing about the world is it will inform you very quickly.
That's true.
Especially if you have a mate, your other half, if you will. They tend to mirror. Relationships are like a mirror. So whoever your partner is going to mirror back certain things that you do, especially your imbalances and your balances. That's the beauty of relationships. They're not safe. They tell us a lot about ourselves. We can learn a lot about ourselves in our relations with other people. So generally, I mean, if you've been on the road and some jerk behind you is honking, he blasts past you because you're doing the speed limit, flips you off, cuts in front of you just to stop at a stoplight.
That's Yerasimos. Yeah.
But I mean, there's an example of unbalance. Now you could flip him off and tell him to get out of his car and take it to the ground. But, it's like, what's the point? This guy's going to go on. He's going to do it again. And eventually he'll either run into someone, he'll either get pulled over, get a ticket. But that's how balance comes to people. We don't necessarily have to be the ones that balance another's unbalance. Just be aware of imbalance. And that kind of helps us get centered. Bruce Lee said, "Don't look at my finger when I'm pointing at all that heavenly glory up at the moon." You know, we tend to look at the overstate the obvious. We tend to want to explain away the things that are right in front of our face, you know, to realize. But the great lesson, I think, in understanding how you get day to day, the best day to day advice I can give a person is keep your balance, you know, keep that balance throughout the day. And when you're in a balanced state, that automatically gives you more access to that inner light. You're going to have more output, more voltage running through your brain because you're centered. And, you know, you look at the great sports icons, the great martial artists. I mean, Michael Jordan scored his greatest seasons, greatest points in games when he was in that zone, that centered zone. You know, the great gymnasts, the great, you know, any sport you can name, when a person's in the zone, they're going to compete beyond off the scale.
Yeah.
And it's the same with martial arts. It's the same with painters. We forget our bodies when we're writing music, you know, and you really become holy mind at that point. And that's when the magic happens. That's when you can draw that power straight from the source itself. And it is a deep well of still water, as Dr. Russell called it. And we pump out that light into motion. And the more balanced you are, the more that pump is able to access that still power source and put it on display, if you will.
Yeah, you know, you use the term voltage, and we're talking about balance, and I immediately go to, you know, your nervous system, and I think this is where it's so important to have a regulated nervous system. And so when life circumstances or things happen, or a person cuts you off, or a person sends an email, or your partner says this, you don't just, you know, go off and have a tantrum and say or do something that, you know, 20 minutes later you wish you didn't. And so, you know, it's so foundational to really get to that place where you're taking care of your body, when you're taking care of your mind, when you're eating the right foods, when you're in an environment that supports health and balance, you know, as opposed to, I mean, let's be real. I lived in New York City for 9 years, and while I had a good experience, let's just say that's not a city that is, you know, meant
Conducive
for
to
having a
balance.
yeah, conducive to balance. Whereas being more aligned with nature and in harmony with nature is going to support you in that endeavor of being more balanced. But just because you are in nature, there are other things that need to happen as well. You know, it doesn't mean just because you stick someone in nature and then they're good. Now it'll help them, but there's other factors that play into it.
Right. Well, it's a lot of the mind really, you know, if we're not comfortable in our own minds, we're not going to be comfortable in our bodies.
Hmm.
That's number one, you had a mind before you had a body. The body is the vehicle for the mind to express its nature, you know, and unfortunately, a lot of people carry over things from past experiences, lives prior to this one. Um, I tend to agree with a lot of the great mystics that, like nature, man is an idea that comes around again and again and again. And so, whether or not you believe that or not, I think there's certainly child prodigies that, you know, can explain um, past lives as an absolute possibility. You know, how does a 2-year-old end up playing virtuoso on a violin, having never played one before, never taken a lesson? So there are those, and there's many examples. But I think a lot of that stuff, call it karma, things that come over from past experience, and it can even be experiences in youth and childhood. You know, you're getting yelled at by a parent, or, you know, God forbid, other things happen to children, you know. And I can say the same for myself. We've all had some childhood trauma, right?
Hmm.
But do we get over it? How do we get over it? Um, Having that experience, you know, that creates, in other words, right out of the gate, we're already at a disadvantage when it comes to balance. So we have to learn it as we go along. And again, they don't teach this in schools, because we'd have a hell of a lot more of a balanced society if we did, you know. So human beings have to pick this knowledge up along the road through experience. And many do come to the experience and realization of balance without these kinds of teachings. Just through their own experiences, they start to realize, hey, this, when I did this, these things happened. we set up certain patterns in life. We have to repeat these patterns until we become aware of them consciously. And then we can stop the repetition, but only when we become consciously aware of them. Patterns are going to repeat as long as you're unconscious about the repetition. Once you become conscious of that repetition, that's when you can put the brakes on. You can sever that repetition only through awareness of it. So that's where the psychological nature comes in. You really have to study your own mind and go into your head deeply, and really self-analyze yourself and say, I'm aware now that I've done this way, and this result keeps happening. And as Russell said, if you remove the cause, the effect's going to stop.
Yeah.
So when we learn too, also that we are cause generators, not just effects of matter, but actual causation. We can make matter do things. We can cause matter to do things. I can cause this body of matter that I call Matt Presti to do things like have an interview or write a song or a symphony or build a garden, whatever it is. So when we become aware of ourselves as cause, then we also become aware that, hey, these effects that I'm causing, if you do the psychological work, you'll stop those repetitious effects only through your awareness of them. And that's how we get more into the school of balance and understand that, every choice we make is going to either A, create more balance, or B, imbalance. And it's to notice, which choice before you make it is going to lead to balance, and choose that one. You're going to make a more divine life for yourself with that awareness.
For sure, man. Being going to be willing to learn your lessons, and we can really use the external world and the feedback from our environment to bring ourselves to balance as well. Like, what are the results that I'm getting? What are the things that I'm repeating? And that can be the catalyst for one to have an internal journey, and to and to look inwards. So, of course, man, still like utilizing the both. And I wanted to ask you, like, do you think there's some kind of, I guess, intentionality around, I guess, because I found in my own experience, obviously, when I'm consumed in artificial light, so to speak, that I feel like my own inner light has diminished. I feel like I have less access to my own internal world when I've gone down these rabbit holes just on my phone, on my computer for too long, whatever it might be. Can you comment on that at all?
Well, I just wrote an article on my website under my post section about communication. So it's fitting that you bring that up. But I think, a lot of the youth, they're glued to their cell phones, even older folks.
Yep.
I notice one parallel though. The older the person I speak to, the less they have anything to do with technology. And so you tend to have the most incredible conversations with the seniors, because like my mom, she had a computer for a minute. She had an email address, couldn't figure out how to use it. She decided, the hell with this. I just want to go back to writing letters. I don't need all this stuff. So, and the family was like, Mom, you got to get on the internet. You got to get an iPhone. You got to have pictures and do. She doesn't want anything to do with it. But I think, just looking at the communication skills of people tells you that these devices, and it's funny we call them devices, we should probably just call them vices, because they really do diminish the inner light. They diminish not only our ability to communicate with each other, but they impersonalize it or depersonalize it, which kind of makes the age-old loved sitting around the campfire conversation a thing of a bygone era. So I think it's really important too to, again, what is the balance? These are fantastic. I ran a university off this thing. So it was really great to be able to have that. I can check my email on the go no matter where I'm at. But at the same time, knowing when to put it down and when to inculcate the light within you, and really let that be the communicator. And I think we could stand to get back to that, especially with the youth, because I mean, I've got nieces and nephews and even grandkids that seem to get lost in it. So we have a rule at Grandma and Grandpa's house. I built a playhouse out in the front yard. There's only so much time you get on your device. Go outside and play, actually take part in the world instead of just the screen. So I think it's a balancing act like anything. You just have to know when to say when. And yeah, but it'll diminish your light if you overload on it. So it's a good thing to take a breath every once in a while.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. It's definitely something I think many of us grapple with. A friend of mine actually on Instagram posted today these images with a bunch of statistics. He was doing some research, and he goes, on average, Americans check their phones 344 times per day. Against, I don't know where he got these studies from.
Right.
And then 71% of us check our phones within 10 minutes of waking up. 53% say that they've never gone longer than 24 hours without their cell phone. 47% consider themselves addicted to their phone. 61% have texted someone in the same room as them before. 62% say they sleep with their phone at night. 36%, this is the craziest one for me. 36% say they'd give up their pets to keep their cell phone.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And then 26% say they've endangered themselves to avoid losing or damaging their cell phone. And then 54% say they panic when their cell phone battery goes below 20%. Yeah, my friend Casper put these on his page.
That's
Crazy. Crazy. My
Yeah.
pet? You kidding me? My
Right.
little Rosie, I would never. I'd throw my freaking phone like against the wall if I had to
I mean, you
choose.
probably got 10% would give their children up for adoption to keep their
Yeah.
if you'd asked that question.
But it's wild. And again, of course, I don't know what the sample size of this was, and it's a statistic. But
Sure.
when you listen to that doesn't seem super far off when you look around,
Right.
when you observe the people. You know, I mean, being back in my hometown, I went to a mall for the first time, like your typical hometown mall for the first time in ages. And I'm walking around and I'm looking and I'm seeing people, and it's like, man, I mean, some things haven't changed, but then a lot of things have. And I think like the device use and how people utilize their devices in the company of others, that I think is really interesting. You know, and again, I say this, I'm not perfect. I'm on my device. If you ask my wife, she'll be like, Yerasimos uses his phone a bit too much. And you know, it's something that I need to get a handle on at times. There's times where I'm good, and there's times where it's like, you know, when you have a podcast and then you have a business and you're using your phone, and this light from the phone, it's like a false light that hypnotizes you in some way. And I don't want to play the victim, because ultimately I have control, but it's like, you have to know this. You have to understand that a lot of these people that created these applications and these companies, they understand the vulnerabilities in the human psyche. So, you know, to kind of co-opt your mind so they can get attention. So you have to know this and go, all right, I'm going to fucking war with this. You know, utilize it for the gifts. Again, here we are on technology, beautiful. We could have conversations with people around the world. We can share knowledge and wisdom. But again, do you know when to like put it in a lockbox and go into the woods for a couple days?
Mhm. I'll just ask a question. What do you think would happen if people looked up as much as they look down at their cell phone? If they spent an equal amount of time looking up, you think the world might be different?
Oh
Um,
man,
I
totally.
think we've seen an uptick in imagination.
Yeah,
Looking up at the stars, at the moon, you know, it
yeah.
just, we're going
Balance.
through this, whatever it is, but I'm convinced there's something good on the other side of it. It's something that I guess the human race just has to go through. It's
Yeah.
an interesting thing to say the least, and it's teaching us a lot about ourselves. And who knows, maybe these things are the seed for telepathy. You know, maybe there come a day when a coronal mass ejection hits, and all of a sudden we don't need to text anymore because we can think directly from mind to mind. We'll find out real quick who's hiding shit and who isn't. You know.
Yeah.
Well,
I
think
think that
about like how often you think about someone or something, then like you get a text, you get an email like two,
Yeah.
5 seconds later.
Dude, well, I also want to comment on that too, is because Joel and I mean, besides my wife, I spend more time than anyone with Joel, and we've kind of synchronized in some way. So even within this interview, there's been times where it said something, and I literally was about to say the thing
Mhm.
multiple times. And I think this happens for both of us, you know, when we're with a person on an interview, or because, you know, we're in the same realm and field, and our consciousness kind of sync up. And I noticed that more in my life. I'm actually noticing it more these days, where I'm able to just tap into something, or think of someone, or let's say I'm laying down for a minute and then the person pops into my head, and then I go to my phone like 20 minutes later, and then I see that they emailed me 20 minutes ago.
Mhm.
So the moment that I thought of them, there was a communication from them, whether on a text or an email. So I can't answer why that is. Maybe you can give the reasons, or what Walter Russell would say, why that happens. is it a form of telepathy or just tapping into some field that you're both connected to?
Well, if, basically, I like to call Dr. Russell Doc for short. So if you hear me say Doc, I'm referring to
Cool.
Walter. But Doc did 2 drawings. He did one of the black of space, and it was just space, one rectangular picture, and it was all black. And in the middle, he had written the one white light of mind. So basically, all of space is literally the field of mind. And everywhere where a body is, there you will find consciousness of some form or another. There's even consciousness in a rock. It's just a lower, grade of consciousness. It's much, much simpler, if you will. Where we're more of a complex consciousness because we're a complex system, the human body, compared to a sand particle of, sand on the beach is quite a complex difference. But that field, if you invert that black of space, if you invert it to where it's white, then all the bodies, all the galaxies, all the planets will appear black. And you'll see that they're each an anomaly. But basically, he said that all bodies in motion come from that stillness of space or that field of consciousness, that field of mind. And so that field, literally, all minds are connected to that field. And like a drop in the ocean, a genius might be, say, a teaspoon of water in the ocean, where just a mediocre person might be just a drop. But still, nonetheless, it's does the drop realize it's something greater than being just a drop? And I think that field, that mind field, if you're on the same frequency, like you and Joel, for instance, have those moments where you're both thinking the same thing without saying it. And I find that with Lori, myself, we do that a lot as well, and some other friends here and there, But that just shows you that mind is not just local; it's non-local as well, which means it's not confined just to the body. I mean, you can imagine yourself standing on the surface of the sun, let's say, and all that heat, yet not getting burned. You can picture it in your mind. Is mind local, or is it also non-local? Local is in aware of the body, yes, but also what else can it be aware of that's not of the body? Can you stand on the rings of the Milky Way? Can you stand on above the hexagon on Saturn and look down into it? There's all these interesting concepts, but really, I think, like you said, telepathy is going to be something that is a realization of the non-local experience of mind being something bigger than just a localized body only experience. And Russell would say of his illumination that he described it scientifically as a short circuit between the 2 lobes, the 2 hemispheres of the brain, an electric short circuit that caused the senses to short out. And that let all that light in. He could see people riding up and down in the elevators during his 39-day experience. He could see through walls. He could hear people talking outside of the building 12 floors down. I mean, his sensory range so greatly expanded in that experience that he also saw the construction of the atom. He saw the Earth from space. He saw planets, formations. He drew pictures of the Lyra system before telescopes could even photograph it. I mean, how did he have this non-local information that he brought back? Hundreds of chemical element aware elucidations where he completely charted out an entire spiral chemical elemental chart, which he said was based on octaves and more like music than Mendeleev's 2D chart of just basically Mendeleev didn't have it right. Matter
you mean
doesn't work.
You mean like the periodic table, or are you talking about
Yeah,
something
the Mendeleev chart, periodic table of the elements. His spiral chart was all divined from illumination through his own mind, and that's what when that fusing happened, he experienced that non-local field, that the all, you could call it, or that one drop suddenly became aware of the whole ocean. And he said what he brought back from 39 days in that experience was but a thimbleful in the mighty ocean. So that's the amount of knowledge, and that's why I think too, we represent that field of consciousness when we snap into it, when we download just a piece of it, we symbolize that through a light bulb going off over the top of our head.
Yeah.
It's sort of that real quick short circuit. That flash of light comes in, and suddenly you are aware of something that is not in any book on the planet anywhere. How does that happen? If knowledge isn't already all there, it just has to come to us through the mind. And there's multiple examples of people who have had those flashes that, the guy who invented the laser, for instance, he had to take a walk in nature. He was just a week away from his funding coming to an end, and they couldn't get the laser to work. And he took that walk in nature, and suddenly his eureka moment that had that flash, he goes, I know what's wrong. He went to the lab. 48 hours later, they had a working laser. So there's these times when, that field of consciousness, we're already accessing it. The question is, how much do we want to access? And if we do desire more access, certainly that is very possible.
Yeah. What's your view on dreams?
Well, it's interesting. I think dreams belong to I want to say dreams belong to the divided universe. It's the hemispheres of the brain. There's certain things in the brain, memories, uh, neurons, certain things contain memories and such, and unresolved issues, things of that nature. So when we're dreaming, we, on an EEG, I believe, or in REM with rapid eye movement, you can actually see that there's electrical things happening in the brain. But there is also a form of dreaming where you don't register. So I would say it's more, there's not two kinds of dreaming. Dreaming belongs to the body, but there's another kind of awareness that has no body sense. It's more of a mind experience. And I've actually experienced that. Have you ever experienced being awake while you're looking at yourself sleeping and actually looking around your own room, fully awake, but you're not in your body? You're looking at yourself sleep. I've done this multiple times, and I'll actually hear music and I'll write music while I'm asleep, aware of myself being asleep. And I've written entire songs and then woke myself up at 3:30. I come out to my studio and I start recording them. And I've met other people that have done this, not necessarily with music, but they've had that experience of being awake while totally asleep, which isn't dreaming. Again, I would just say that's being consciously aware, because really you don't need to sleep necessarily. And that was like Walter's experience of 39 days, where he was wide awake for 39 days. Even though his body would sleep, he was still consciously aware. And then he'd wake up and begin writing things down, hundreds of chemical charts, drawings. His Universal One book was that, all that culminated into, 200 and some pages of cosmic knowledge that he basically downloaded during that experience. But that just, to me, that's sort of it's kind of like a lighthouse on the horizon. The human being is not at the end of its journey, and we have a long way to go, thousands of years. And from Russell's own experience, he wrote that his message that he was to deliver to man, he was commanded by the light of consciousness, or the creator, again, call it what you will, to deliver this message to mankind. And he said that it was a 3,000-year long journey to get to this point where mankind would become aware of his light within, and that he was but the heralder of the first 50 years. So we got quite a long way to go. But again, this is not the end of the human being. We are just on the very beginning of discovering, this light within that is the source of all knowledge. And again, like knowledge is that white light because it's undivided. We can go more into that color spectrum versus white light, what that all is. But I think it's a great thing to realize that we all have access to that library of knowledge, which is cosmic and universal.
Freaking incredible, man. Like just how much we don't know, how much we're unaware of, and how much, I guess, Russell actually extrapolated a lot of this information. I recall I started reading The Secret of Light not long ago. I'm not very far through, but I loved his take on, I guess, um, eternal life, so to speak. And he referenced it as our physicality in this experience is almost like just imagine a wheel rolling on the ground. And the moment a single spoke touches the ground, that's this physicality. But life just simply continues as the wheel rolls. But this experience now is just that moment of, I guess, that light meeting. Yeah, in that analogy. Didn't explain it very well, but I think you might understand what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, as divine beings, I really truly think we're all part of that. We come from the undivided into a divided state. It takes two parents, right? There's only men and women, by the way. When those two come together, those polarities, they recreate again an offspring. So, but they have to come together. They have to unite as one to then again produce another two. So all mothers and fathers are pairs of opposites, and that's how he defined the universe the way it works. That basically a polarity, a still singularity, divides in half to set up a polarized opposition of interchange. So you have your north and south poles that interchange electrically, just like the brain. You have a north and south pole with the brain itself. And so, that's proof to me that if you want to understand the science, the best way to remember is always remember that all pairs of opposites, all bodies in motion require two poles. You have to have two poles. A bar magnet, for instance, has two poles, north and south. What happens when you take your little pole meter and you go to the middle of the bar magnet? It doesn't light up. Why is that? Because that's the fulcrum. That's the undivided. That's where no polarity is. See, polarity, north and south, get as far away from each other as possible. So that's what sets up the interchange of electricity, which this is absolutely an electric universe. That is not a theory. That is just the way it is. And Russell, I would say, didn't write theories. He wasn't a theorist. He conceptualized from an artist standpoint. But it's more correct to call his books manuals for nature, an actual working manual, because I've seen things in the lab myself that absolutely prove everything I've just stated about polarity, which are his statements. I'm just sharing them with you guys. But there's so much to it and so much to come yet in terms of evidence that needs to be presented. But it's going to blow holes in this so-called one-way heat, death, dying universe. We actually live in a two-way motion universe, one of compression, one of expansion. And unfortunately, our current materialist scientific scientism and dogma teaches that this universe is the result of a Big Bang, which is the Catholic origin of the universe. That was Lemaitr's, Jesuit Monsignor Lemaitr's theory that Pope Pius XII said confirmed Genesis 1:1. But again, that's why I think that theory got introduced just a few short years after the Universal One was released, because Doc's literally introducing to the world of science in the New York Times as well, in his arguments with other physicists there back in the early 30s. He's introducing this two-way continuous motion universe, which prompted the Catholic Church to say, we got to bury that, threaten them with a decree, and let's get Jesuit Monsignor Lemaitre to release the one-way heat, death, dying universe so that we can lock everybody in to this entropy-only dying universe model. We don't want people to know it's a living universe.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's why our concepts of electricity are wrong. That's why our concepts of mind are wrong. That's why materialism dominates the scientific chairs of the major universities. That's where all this money came for supporting the quantum idea, which Russell said the quantum was a travesty of nature. There's no such thing as a packet of energy. Energy doesn't work that way, see? So again, that's a whole nother level of things we could get into. I've gone far off the tangent there for your question.
Oh, good, man. Don't mind at all. Like, I just want to clarify if like someone listening is wanting to get into Russell's work, where would you recommend they start?
That's a great question because there's so many avenues into this work.
Yeah.
A lot of people have come to the work through that little book called The Man Who Tapped the Secrets of the Universe, which was written by biographer Glenn Clark. Russell did a tour with Glenn Clark, several actually from 1945 on to about 48 or so. And that's a great sketch biography. A lot of people, again, have come to it. My avenue into it was through The Secret of Light. If you're a musician, you might want to start with that. Other avenues are the Divine Iliad, the Message of the Divine Iliad, Volume 1 and 2, which is just divine poetry. And it's all about his illumination experience from that 39 days. And it breaks down with commentary the 39,000 words he wrote down from that experience. And then there's, of course, there's Leo's work, God Will Work With You, But Not For You, which is an incredible book. Why You Cannot Die by Leo Russell is absolutely incredible, too. Fantastic. I don't think anybody's really tackled life after death, what it really is, and how the nature of, again, Russell science, you got to understand that all duality unfolds from stillness, silence, and sexlessness and non-dimensionality into opposites of motion that interchange electrically and then refold back into that still condition. And there's a reason why we don't start our number system with 2. We don't go 2, 1, 3, 4, 5. We go 1, 2, 3. Because from 1, especially in music, you have to have the 1 in order to have the 2. So I would term this universe not a duality, but rather a triality. That you always have a fulcrum that doesn't move, and then you have the duality, which the fulcrum and the opposites equal 3. And so 3 is really the magic number. And then 3 squared is 6, 3 cubed is 9. There's your 369. So again, you're looking at this universe as something that's tonal, musical, but also elemental chemically, and that mind is the cause of it all. Whatever inspires you, look at the titles and go for it. Just pick something and go with it. A lot of people like the Universal One too. So.
Awesome.
I just ordered the Glenn Clark book actually before we got on today. So
during the podcast,
what?
During the podcast?
No, before. I was like, oh, that's 70 pages. That's cool. I feel like I could get a nice little intro. Yeah, I love what you said too. Wait, what'd you say?
Send me a copy too.
Yeah, great. I love how you said the triality too, because even in some of my earlier studies in the psychology and the psyche, I had teachers who talked about the aware ego, Doctors Hal and Sidra Stone. It was this idea of like standing between the tension of opposites. Though the aware ego has the ability to hold the tension of both opposites. So you're able to kind of feel this duality within you instead of just kind of like living on one foot and bouncing from one to the other, but instead holding space for these opposing parts within you, and then what can grow, what can evolve from that, what decisions can you make when you're able to feel that tension of opposites. I think it's just much more holistic and inclusive within yourself and knowing yourself to that degree.
Kind of, I think it's reminiscent from a verse in the Tao Te Ching as well, right? 1 gave birth to 2, 2 gave birth to the 3, 3 gave birth to all things.
Yeah, and that's definitely something to consider. I mean, from all things with 1, right? Everything else divided, di is 2. So try 3, right? And so on. But that source, that undivided source, is within each and every one of us as well. And that's that field of consciousness that is omnipresent. So that's why our minds can be elsewhere than where our bodies are. And oftentimes our brain gets in the way, our mental gets in between the physical and the spiritual, and it causes all kinds of hell. The materialist is hell bent on denying the spiritual side of everything, right? So they're all about the mental explanation through physicality. But in denying that light within, they also set themselves up for failure, because it's as if they're denying consciousness itself and saying that everything, nothing man-made. These glasses, for instance, were not the result of an explosion. So this whole idea of the Big Bang being the result of an explosion from the very get-go, the whole thing is just, it doesn't make any sense. Where nature takes many, 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 many years to build something. An oak tree could take 75 years from seed to 100-foot tall oak to become what it is. Nature does things extremely deliberately, slowly, and man must do in like to create anything good. You can't just create, a Mona Lisa in 2 minutes. But unfortunately, these apps have limited our ability to use our hands in the external physical world the way the great artists of antiquity have. I think we should go back a generation, look at art, and really rekindle the flame of using our own two hands to create, as opposed to apps. Let's try to find the ability to directly inspire your own fingers into not tapping a screen, but painting, drawing, writing, be an author. There's so many things you can do with your hands. Even cooking. Cooking is an art. There's so many things you can do with your hands, and that a cell phone just can't do. But one thing good about technology is it does provide us quick information, and certain things like, when should I plant? What's the best time to plant? Okay, well, the Farmer's Almanac says during the full moon, you plant this particular thing. That's great to have. But if you don't go out to the garden and actually dig a hole and plant it, it's not going to happen. Nothing's going to grow. So the beauty of Russell's work and his message is that if you want something to exist, by God, use your two strong arms and build the damn thing. No matter what it is, if you're willing to build it, it will stand before you. But you first have to conceive of an idea. Then you have to mentally think it out, take it apart in your mind, in your brain, think it out. And then once you think it out into the parts, start acquiring those parts and then reassemble it. And that's really the process of creation.
I love it, man. And just imagine what the whole idea of the Big Bang, which is really like an irrational conception of the universe, festering at the base of most people's psyche, is doing. What's that saying about your own capability, your own ability to think, to create, to reason? When deep down, there's this thing festering where you believe that life was born out of randomness, out of the irrational. Come on.
Yeah, and we call it the big wank, in Russell science. It's a wank. They're wanking you. But if you knew this universe was continuous and that you, as an idea of a human being, were also continuous, how would that change our outlook? How would it be to know that we cannot die, that we may lose these bodies, but this consciousness will sure as well pick up another one? Say you live to be 80 years, let's just assume that you're going to rest for 80 years in the undivided stillness, right? So at some point, you're going to become restless and your consciousness will desire to exist. It'll become strong, and bam, you're going to be, right between the sperm and the egg, meeting to develop a new body to express your desires on another stage or another planet. The human idea is an incredible thing because we are you could say, the organic intelligence, body, mind, and spirit together in this plane of reality. And our purpose is to co-create with the creator, to make and create in much the same way that God creates nature. Nature is God's canvas. Man-made items are the canvas of man. And so we learn from nature how to be creative and how to live in balance. That's really the greatest teacher of balance is nature. So we would do well to pay attention to her ways and processes.
Yeah. So as if I was to play devil's advocate or a skeptic for a second, like what gave birth to the undivided field, to the one, to the, this undivided white light? Where did that come from? Or was that just is? Is that always is? Or
It is the isness.
yeah.
It always was, always will be. It's the alpha and the omega, but bodies, you see, if temporality, which are what bodies are, moons come and go, comets come and go, suns come and go, bodies of all kinds, trees, tigers, human beings, we come and go because bodies are temporal by nature, which basically means temporary. They're not permanent things. What is permanent is the field from which those things extend and return to. That is not a temporal thing, and it's not something we can sense with our senses. We can know it with our minds, though. We can know love. We can't measure it in a laboratory. The funny thing is, a lot of scientists use that word. A lot of materialists who don't believe in anything immaterial use that word, but they can't measure or prove that it exists with any standard test in the laboratory. You know, but it is something that very much so exists. It means different things to different people, but ultimately, I would play creator's advocate and say, if that field of mind didn't exist, where do new ideas come from? If there's no knowledge in a library, you know, there's no knowledge in a library. Think about this for a second. It's all symbols. Words are symbols.
Mhm.
Letters are symbols. Where's the knowledge in these books? It's not in the books. When you read the words, it awakens something in you. That's where the knowledge is. It's not in the books, it's in you. You go,
Mhm.
oh, I get it. That's happening here in the mind, in the field of consciousness. You're downloading, you're being awakened by the words you're reading to a truism, to an axiom, and it's becoming something that becomes a part of you. And so you're really awakening the light within yourself. And this takes thousands and thousands of lifetimes. It could take 100 lifetimes to reach the point of a Da Vinci, or could take 1,000. I don't really know
Yeah.
but I do know this, that there's no knowledge in a library. There's just the awakening of the experience of knowledge, which is in you. And so that tells me that, everybody who is a human being has the potential to awaken something within them, which is from that field, of
I
all
love
knowledge.
Yeah, I love that new way of looking at that, in terms of, I mean, that's kind of was really profound for me what you just said about there's no knowledge in the library, it's what gets awakened within you.
Lots of
Uh,
information, no knowledge.
yeah. I
Right.
wanted to comment on this because, we've talked a lot about this white light, white light, white light. And where else do you hear about that when people talk about they saw a white light? They died for 14 minutes
Yep.
and then they went to this place and they saw their relatives and then maybe they came back. And
Yep.
so do you think they just tap into that fulcrum point, that non-dual place for a moment and then come back into the realm of duality?
Very much so. 10,000 plus near death experiences are cataloged, probably 100,000 now, if not more. But very interesting that the white light is always representative of that. Now, if you take a prism like Newton or like Goethe, and you put a white light, you take a piece of cardboard or something and put a little hole in it. So just that one beam of light shines out of that hole into that prism. That white light separates into what we now know as the color spectrum. And that's what Walter Russell basically, he had two kinds of light in his science. Capital L light, which is the light of mind, which is consciousness. It's represented again by that light bulb or that white flash, that inspiration, that flash of inspiration. And then there's the lowercase light, which is the divided light spectrum, which is your red, blue, green, yellow, orange, magenta, whatever. And when Goethe worked with light, he also said that the shadow is a color as well, which is an interesting observation. But that the light and the dark and its mixtures and different expressiveness in its character was part and parcel to what we see, what we don't see, and everything in between. And then you had the interesting thing, just to throw this out because we're on the subject. I wanted to say this earlier, but if you take that white light beam through a prism, and you see those colors of the prism that are the color spectrum. If you were to put those on a wheel, okay, like a cardboard wheel, if you were to put each one of those colors on the cardboard wheel in the same representative pie slice, equal pie slices, and then you spin that wheel with all those colors, guess what you see?
White.
White light. So if the color spectrum comes from white light, which is lowercase in Russell science, but the capital L light is the undivided light of mind, then if mind is the field that is omnipresent in the universe, and consciousness is but centered in a body, then that can certainly explain conceptually how consciousness is able to manifest in different places at different times omnipresently. I mean, you still carry the same consciousness whether you're in the northern hemisphere at the North Pole or at the South Pole or at the equator. So what's real here? What is actual reality?
So Matt, are you saying if we found a wheel big enough to tape 7 billion people on it and we spinned it, it would be white light?
Now that's a hard one to say. um, I think 7 billion people knew what they unfolded from and what they refold into. If they knew that inherently, and if they knew that what they do to another person, they do to themselves, we'd have quite a different world.
Yeah.
You know, and that's something I say that the powers that never were, a lot of people call them the Illuminati. I call them the Deluminati because there's no light, no recognition of light in them whatsoever. So we shouldn't give that majestic descriptive term to them.
Yeah.
Shouldn't give it over to them. Call them what they are, deluminated. And they're taking the world and its people back to the blackness of the jungle. You know, and we want to go to the mountaintop. We want to see the world for what it is and be able to work as a divine human being within it. And that's our power. It's our birthright. We should reclaim it, you know.
Yeah. It seems like I say they obviously in this general term, but want to keep us from illuminating, to the
Yeah.
degree that we can and know how, and that is our birthright.
Yeah. To hear Yuval Noah Harari say it, you know, you won't need God. We are going to be a God now. And you're going to, most of you aren't needed anymore. It's like the hubris of these people, they're really a 0.00001% of the human population trying to control the whole rest of it. And it's just not going to work, but it's fascinating to watch them trip over themselves in the effort. This will be a big lesson. 100 years from now, we're going to have history books that look at this time we've gone through for what it really is.
Well,
I'm convinced you can't get over on the universe, no matter how many people you've got working with you. There's certain divine laws that they are in such violation of that. And remember, man, the pendulum always swings back.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking. Like, you had the Dark Ages and then the Enlightenment came afterwards. And so where are we now and what will follow? And I mean, we see it around us. There are more and more people, the cracks are slipping in. They're really questioning what's happening in the world. And they're like really wanting to take more ownership of their life and their health and their bodies and see what's possible, and I love it. It's something I think all of us are passionate about. It's part of the work that Joel and I do. And I don't know, man, I'm really optimistic and excited, even though I know who knows how things will unfold. There are dark times and there will continue to be to some degree, but at the same time, I feel great about what's unfolding.
Absolutely. I mean, it's all divine, if you want to say it that way,
Yeah.
and it's also, we have a choice to make, as the great Gandalf, to quote him, all that matters is what we choose to do with the time we've been given, and do something divine, do something to fulfill your purpose, which if you haven't discovered it yet, start thinking more inwardly. and less outwardly. The Faucis of the world, those are the ghouls standing at the gates of the temple saying, "Don't go in there. You're forbidden to go in there.
Yeah.
There's no light in there, just darkness. Just trust me. Take this shot and do what I say." Well, some people get brave and they get the courage and they go, "You know what? I'm going through the gate. I'm going to run right past these foo dogs, these guardians, and I'm going to go into the center of the gate and I'm going to find out what's in there." And that's the light in ourselves, and we can learn from that. In fact, that's the only place new knowledge does come from. Is that internal knowledge. I mean, before the Wright brothers, there was no airplane on this planet. I mean, maybe, well, let's say going back before Egypt, right? There might have been some helicopters, hieroglyphics, and things like that. But that discovery by two men and the whole world said, no, this can't happen. For 25 years, there were farmers and rural people that didn't get the papers making the announcements that the Wright brothers had achieved flight. They're calling the sheriff going, "There's something in the sky." Well, it's an airplane, dude. You should have read the papers, right? But the point is that until these things become, until that idea is built, until you build the plane, it's just an idea. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And I'm getting ready to drop a documentary in the next month. I've actually finally, after several years of thinking about this, decided I'm going to put it out there. It's taken a long time to do, but it's called Dispelling Dimensional Madness, which I'm going to completely show the scientism and the New Age Gnostic view of higher dimensions and all this stuff to be total bullocks.
Awesome.
It's all a form of escapism. We have one reality, and it's our job to notice that we have the very real power of changing that reality anytime we want. And that's what I think is the greatest secret that this Illuminati is hiding from us. They want the power to change reality, but want us all to want to get the hell out of here or look to something other than ourselves as the solution. So, I'm going to drop that probably in a month or two. So
Can't wait to see it, man. That sounds right up our alley, man. I'm really psyched that it's a creation that's been going on for several years, and you're about to put it out.
took a lot of thought, man, a lot of thought, and looking at the roots. Where does this whole idea of dimensions come from? Why are these dimensions in the 1800s all about measuring physical things, and then suddenly they become imagination, scientific romance? How did it go from actual measuring to measure out to, okay, we all need to think in the fifth dimension? Because I've heard I'm gonna put some weight down on this production. It's gonna be pretty damning.
Can't wait, man. So what are your thoughts on, like, I guess, hostile occult forces or interdimensional beings and whatnot? If you can comment on that.
Well, I don't buy the interdimensional thing. Again, it's part of the research I've done, culminating probably 5 to 6 years worth, and going back and actually looking at who brought this idea of dimensions. Where did it come from? The cult-like personas of the 19th century in the UK, and these spirit meetings that used to take place with the upper echelons of society. In New York, they had these seance clubs that would get together and channel entities and ascended masters. And, really the birth of the New Age happened in the UK, around the idea of different planes of existence and speaking with ghosts, and a lot of interesting things in the authors that purported the idea of a fourth dimension, which Einstein actually stole from Edwin Abbott, who wrote Flatlanders. He took Edwin's theory of a fourth dimension and applied it to time, which time is not fourth dimension. You don't need a fourth dimension for time. In fact, we don't even live in a third dimension. The whole idea of dimension being a physical place somewhere in the universe is flawed, because the very word itself means to measure out.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we go from, like, barometric pressure or tone or color or width, breadth, and length to the fourth dimension, which is a place, or the fifth dimension in the New Age, that we all need to get to solve our problems in this little world? I mean, it's pure escapism. It's Gnosticism on acid, and it needs to be put down like a lame animal, because anything that takes you out of where you are. And the funny thing is, I've met many people in the New Age movement and stuff over the years. One in particular says, I live in the fifth dimension now, so things here don't bother me anymore. I'm like, well, you're still fucking here.
Yeah.
You're still here, so where's this fifth dimension? It's ludicrous. It's a form of insanity and madness, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think the elite know this, and they put this crap out there. And it used to be called, science fiction used to be called scientific romance. And when it came to the States, they changed it to science fiction because romanticism, it's the romance age, right? Scientific romance was science fiction back in the UK, and it changed when it came here. And then you get all the drops in the 50s with the Twilight Zone. You've entered the fifth dimension, a dimension of sight and sound. This is where they start drilling it. And then you got Carl Sagan come on with his Flatlanders revamp, and the science of the 70s talking about dimensions. Now you have Michio Kaku and Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about, multiverses and parallel universes and stuff that, there's one universe, it's one, and we live in it. And we need to know from the masters who learned to master reality how they did it and how we can do like they did, and it's the shoulders of giants again, the Russells, the Steiners, there's just too many to name. But the Buckminster Fullers, these guys are the visionaries whose shoulders we stand on, and we should mimic them. We should learn to, create the kinds of things with our own two hands that uplifts humanity and puts the power back in our court, takes it away. No more giving our power away. We need to take it back, and we need to stop. And I think it's happening on a massive scale. There's a huge red wave coming to the United States. It's a red tsunami tomorrow, and I can't wait, because that's when the work really starts. And I want to see Nuremberg 2.0, and I want to see justice delivered, and finally that should give humanity a welcome reprieve from all the craziness that's happened. But I'm positive, I'm a positivist, and I look, optimism is my forte as much as possible. Feel bad when you need to feel bad. If you need to feel down, feel it, don't repress it, but then get back to work. And the past 2 years for me has been like I've been in a cave, man. I'm telling you, but it's been a lot of work, a lot of things I want to just come out and say to the world, this is what I'm doing, but it's not time yet. So It's sort of an incubation period, but again, like a seed, it has to be in the ground before it can sprout, but when it does, it's going to go both directions and it's going to come up. And when it's time, it's time.
That's awesome, dude. Real quickly, I just want to throw this in there because you mentioned a day of reckoning, Nuremberg, and we were talking about Fauci before and Lord of the Rings. And I just was just thinking, like, Fauci kind of reminds me of Gollum. He just does. He's like, he thinks he is the science, and he just wants the power of the ring, Ultimately, he ends up, melting in a pool of lava. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. The guy is just talk about demented, not in touch with reality. And that's Pluto, a lot of Pluto there coming to pull the curtain back and show us who these people really are. But if you put the preacher from Poltergeist and Joe Biden up on the same screen, you can't tell the difference. Come with me, right into the light. No, funny, people think of the light in different ways, but there's one light that's never going to lie to you, and it manifests in you in what they call the still small voice, or the voice of your conscience. And people, we need to start listening to that voice, because that's going to lead us out of here and into a better realm, which is here. It's going to create the realm that we really desire, which is truth, honesty, inventiveness, things of that nature. And when times get hard, the beauty of that is necessity is the mother and father of all invention. And I think we're really going to see some incredibly creative things going on in the world, different methods of transferring currency between human beings. That's already being built, uncancelable platforms that are cancel proof. And, we're basically at a crossroads. There's two emerging paths, one going straight down to the blackness of the jungle and the other heading upward to the heavens, and we shouldn't limit ourselves in what we're capable of, because we have all that knowledge inside of us and we can tap it anytime we want.
Couldn't agree more, man. So inspiring. Matt, I feel like we could honestly chat for hours. Might have to do a return at some point. But brother, thank you so much for the journey you've walked, for who you are, and for the knowledge that you're here to share with us, man. It's I know my journey in terms of, Walter Russell's work is very, very, very early days, but I'm far more excited to venture onto the exploration and discover. And I feel that call for sure. And I highly implore anyone that's gotten value from this podcast to walk that same path and discover and, be illuminated. Matt, any final words for sorry, go for it.
I was just going to say, he's one of many giants out there. But the beauty of the giants whose shoulders we stand on is that we can become giants as well. Yep. Let's push ourselves. Let's strive for a higher perfection. And I tend to think this universe is perfect. It's interesting, but I would only say that because don't we perfectly fuck up our lives? But we can perfectly manifest the good in them as well. We just need to take the responsibility. And the point of a mystery, we do live in the great mystery, but the point of the mystery is to try to figure it out, right? Yeah. If we just said it, it's just a mystery, it's unsolvable, why would we drive to learn anything new? The point of a mystery is to get on the case and try to figure it out. So, and it's going to take literally thousands of years, but I see a time, as Russell did himself, that in the future, humanity is going to gain more and more godlike power. So we need to be as responsible as we can possibly be if we're going to be able to wield that power. I think we're a little spiritually immature for the technology that's upon us now, but it's also a lesson. We learn these lessons so that we can attain the balance needed to handle the developments and the technologies that we're going to discover, but also that, again, the human race was created to be a divine expression, a vehicle to express the divine itself. And I think that's the purpose of man. So then man's sole purpose is to manifest his own creator. And the more of us that do that, the more we can create a world that doesn't need these dark forces any longer.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Yeah, I appreciate it, man. I love hearing about spirituality through this lens. It makes me more connected to it, as opposed to a lot of the fluff that's out there, a lot of the dogmatic stuff that many of us were raised with. And it's something that really aligns with me. And so, like, I echo what Joel said, man. Thanks for your work. Thanks for your presence. Thanks, for everything you do, dude. And just looking forward to stay connected as we move forward.
I appreciate that. I'd love to join you guys again. And if anybody wants to learn more, they can reach my site, mattpresti.com, and check out Walter Russell's work. The university could really use the support. www.philosophy.org. And that's the hub for all the Russell work, the best quality Russell books. Don't just get a PDF free off the pirated internet. Go support the university, support the foundation, which helps keep the artwork maintained and keep it open to the public and keep these incredible books and concepts going out to the world. There's a lot of great minds out there, and the more you put on your shelf from the books of incredible authors, and the more you're going to develop a worldview that's full of beauty and power that's going to help us to change and turn things around.
Amazing. Guys, you know what to do. If you've gotten value from this, continue the exploration. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
What's up, everyone? What an amazing conversation that was with Matt Presti. How inspiring was that? Just a reminder again that round 4 of Rise Above the Herd, our 8-week group coaching program for truth seekers. Applications are now open. We're only taking 12 people. So again, if you're feeling inspired by this chat, if you really want to take the next steps in your life, If you want to step into your potential, go to our website, riseabovetheherd.co. You can read everything that we have there. You can read all our testimonials. And if you truly resonate with what you're seeing there and you want to apply, just press the button. You get to jump on a 20-minute free call with us. And again, we can talk about what next steps are there for you in your path, and whether or not you want to continue growing and evolving to the best person you want to be, and whether we're the right fit to support you in that journey. So check it out. If it truly resonates, hit us up. And as always, if you love the podcast, rate, review, subscribe wherever you are. We really, really appreciate it. Share on social media. We love what we're doing. We're really grateful for your support, and looking forward to the next chat.
Smoking mirrors, I'm seeing through the illusion. Waking up in a time, they think you're in a delusion. Somebody set the alarms, cause they be too busy snoozing. I'm in a DeLorean, fast forward in evolution to a place where we can share our confusions. Yeah, 450 BC, I'm sharing tea with